For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Olivia Calderon, and I'm with the New America Foundation. And on behalf of the Asset Policy Initiative of California, the California Research Bureau, and the New America Foundation, I welcome you to our Asset Policy Forum. Before I begin, I'd like to remind everyone to please turn off your cell phones. And I'm pleased that today we have Assemblyman Jose Solorio representing Orange County in the cities of Santa Ana, Anaheim, and Garden Grove, who is going to be joining us and making a few opening remarks, setting the stage for today's discussion on microenterprise development, followed by Claudia Vick, the Chief Executive Officer for Cameo, the California Association of Microenterprise Opportunity. Ms. Vick will be discussing the ways in which California can begin to stimulate the growth and successes of entrepreneurship here in California. If you would, please join me in welcoming Assemblyman Jose Solorio and Ms. Claudia Vick. Thank you so much.
It's a beautiful day outside and a beautiful day inside. I want to thank everybody that made this possible, especially the New America Foundation. Today we have an unemployment rate in California that's growing. It's nearly 7% now, and that's not a good thing. But we all know what the solution to that is. It's jobs, jobs, and jobs. Our challenge in this state and in the capital and outside the capital is what can we do to create an environment in California where we have job development and growth. And today, we're here for, I think, a very important occasion to talk about microenterprises and what we can do to support them here in our great state. Too often we look for a solution by government, or we look for a solution by a big business to inspire these type of efforts, inspire the creation of jobs, but really, those days aren't here. Maybe they never were here, but definitely in this era, we need to find new ways of just creating those small businesses, one business at a time, and that's what we're here for today, and that's where microenterprises come in. And when we're talking about microenterprises, we're talking about small businesses. Typically, businesses that might be 5 people or less. I can tell you that it's my own goal, being an assembly member, also being the new convener of the New Democrat Caucus in the legislature, where we're about jobs and growing the economy. I want to make sure that microenterprises develop, grow, and flourish, and I think it's happening. Just to give you, 2 examples, would first start by thinking of my own city of Santa Ana in Orange County. Santa Ana has about 360,000 residents, and within that city we have about 15,000 businesses. And you know what? They're not large businesses. They're small businesses, and they're micro-enterprises, many of them immigrant-based. There's a lot of energy in that immigrant community, and I'm happy about that. Also, we have a very thriving, high-tech community in California. I'm actually right now, working on a resolution pretty much declaring that California is the high-tech capital of the universe. We do have so many businesses in Northern California, but we've actually found out that there's an equal number in Southern California to that in Northern California, and that's something I think that's exciting to talk about. Many of those businesses started in garages, and we want to see them not just stay in their garage, but grow beyond that. Let me begin to close by saying that we know that microenterprise programs work. That's why we're here today, because I know you believe them in them as well. But we do need to figure out how to grow those programs and learn more. I know in the legislature, I'm also very happy to have a fellow assembly member, Amina Carter, who has a microenterprise development bill, AB 2998, that's about training and about doing more through our workforce investment boards at the local level. And we want to learn about that bill and hopefully see it go through the legislature and get signed into law. I'm also real proud here to be with Cameo and with Claudia Vick and hear a great presentation. I personally am going to stay throughout the presentation. I hope you all do. to learn about what we can do to make California a place for small business and a place for micro enterprise in California. Welcome to Claudia Wieck.
Actually, Assemblyman Solorio just gave me my speech. I don't know how you saw it written down here, but I was going to mention that Orange County is probably 90% micro businesses because of the immigrant and just the nature of the business atmosphere there. And so it's really appropriate and also to look at the almost 7% unemployment rate that we're seeing in California today. And remember, that rate doesn't even reflect those people who've given up looking for wage employment. Many of these folks have started a micro business. Many of them are operating off the books. Many of them will grow those businesses and add jobs and tax revenues to our cities and towns and rural regions. Microenterprise is where it all begins. If I can leave you with any thought, when you think of microenterprise, think of Microsoft and Microchip, as you were saying, we're the center of the universe now. When you think of microenterprise, that's where it all starts, with an idea, with a skill, and above all, with a fierce desire to be independent and self-determining. Whether that's family self-sufficiency, whether it's someone who got laid off from their job and now they're just determined to find their way and to run their own show. That's what I have seen over the 20 years that I've worked in this field. Microenterprise really makes sense, and it should be the centerpiece of our state's economic development. I know Tony Simon would agree with me. I'm so glad you're sitting right in the front seat there. I mentioned that I've been in this field for really since 1988. I was one of the first founders and started an entrepreneurship center called the Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center in San Francisco, which was one of the first in the country. And we were just exploring what would it mean if you help people who were working, maybe low, moderate income folks, working in wage jobs, to be owners. We've talked about home ownership. What about business ownership? Well, we know what that's like now, but at that time in the 80s, it was still kind of a head-scratcher, and a lot of people didn't believe in it. Business incubation, again, why do that? But in fact, we've shown that it's been successful, and I wanted to start out with a story which was from one of my first students, Servio Gomez in San Francisco. He operates a firm called Back to the Picture Frame Shop, and it's on Valencia Street. Written up in the New York Times last week, the hipster center of San Francisco, but at that time, Valencia Street was kind of a low-end neighborhood in the Mission District. And Servio came from El Salvador. He's currently maybe like 48, so he came over 25 years ago as a student from El Salvador. He sold oranges on the LA freeway. I think some of us have seen folks doing that. It's dangerous, difficult work. He got himself through school. He worked at a frame shop while he was in school. When he got out of school, he opened a frame shop and went belly up very quickly, and then he realized he needed to know more about business planning. He took the Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center's 14-week business planning class, opened Back to the Picture in a very little space on Valencia Street. About 10 years later, he expanded into a much larger space with an art gallery where he shows local artists' work in the Mission. He has a Ja Valencia coffee shop that he bought, which is next door. 2 years later, about in 2000, he opened another frame shop that his brother runs. I guess he has about 6 or 7 employees now. And then just last month, he opened a coffee shop and art gallery in the Bayview Hunters Point. People know about that community in San Francisco, been really long disinvested. So it takes a while. That's the story. It took him to accrue that kind of wealth or those assets, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But that's what we mean when we're talking about building assets individually and then how they become community assets and how those jobs, those taxes, and that energy, that wonderful creative energy, is really your return on investment. So let me try this. Do I push the red button? I like never do these. Okay. Well, which one? Oh, this button here, there, this one. So I did push that one a couple times. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. I was gonna compare myself to Gerald Ford about not being able to chew gum and walk at the same time, but most people are too young to remember him, so this is well, right? Okay, let me just tell you a little bit about Cameo. We're a statewide network, sort of like a trade association for microenterprise development organizations that provide business assistance, training, pre-loan preparation, and micro-lending to low and moderate income and aspiring entrepreneurs. Our network is made up of nonprofits, some government, joint powers people, individuals, and other associations and corporate sponsors. Our mission, obviously, we want to promote economic opportunity through the tool of microenterprise development. And Cameo helps to build our members' capacity through various training programs and best practices. Our real focus now is to help to scale up services from the 18,000 businesses that are served every year now. We'd like to see 100,000 served a year, and I'll be talking about that more. And then we do advocacy, like being here today, to build public awareness and to also develop and direct resources to the field. Okay. Maybe I have a negative force field now. Well, oh, there we go. I think Mr. Solario defined microenterprise, but I just want to say, in your mind, keep it as a startup or a business of 5 or less employees. Starts up and usually less than $35,000 in capital. When we talk about microenterprise development, we're usually talking about low and moderate income, women, emerging minority populations, and the disabled. And we're also talking about businesses that are operating like on the former Valencia Street in lower income communities in Bayview Hunters Point, in parts of Sacramento. And we're also talking about locally owned small farms and locally owned businesses. So it's a very broad spectrum of types of businesses. And so when I talk about microenterprise development, I want you to think about it broadly. There you go. I mentioned earlier that microenterprise development is really along the spectrum of economic opportunity. Programs provide training, loan packaging. The financing is what we call micro and small business loans, many times through SBA. The State Loan Guarantee Program is also involved in this, a lot of the bank programs, and the SBA Microloan Program. Also, we're talking about helping businesses plan and manage their startup and growth stages, help informal businesses become stable and keep financial records and pay taxes. As I mentioned earlier, many microenterprises are in the informal sector, and as part of our mission to bring them up to speed and to get them to the point where they can, where they will pay taxes or can pay taxes and do have those financial records. And what we want to think about all along is creating an asset, the income from which would leverage other assets, and home ownership in particular. I found that in working with probably 2,000 entrepreneurs over 20 years, 14 years when I was at Renaissance, the first indication that they were successful is that they would take a vacation, and the second indication was they bought a home. And this was very consistent. Now I want to put microenterprise into a much broader perspective now for you in terms of the trends that are affecting California microenterprise. I want to just say straight out, self-employment is the labor market trend. It's increased 24% since from 2001 to 2005. And I want to refer you to the policy brief that was recently prepared by Rona Sheriff in the Senate Office of Research that pulls all this together. We're also seeing changing demographics in terms of small business creation. Immigrant and women entrepreneurs, retirees starting businesses. 75% of college students want to own their own business, and many of them intend to do it right after graduation. This is totally new. This was not the case 15 years ago. Let's see. Oh yeah, the Senate Office of Research also reported that we now have 3.4 million self-employed microenterprises, and the sole proprietors, or the single person, are 2.6 million of those. So you can see that this is a really strong trend in our state. The technology also, and emerging technology, is supportive of the micro business and the self-employed. We see broadband expanding, rural areas, more and more home-based businesses increasing. And we're also seeing a trend of businesses not adding lots of employees, but using technology, virtual capacity, and also independent contractors. I know that's a dirty word with unions, but if you call it self-employed, freelancers, permalancers now, people calling themselves. In many ways, we call this the rise of the artisan economy, and that's a term, I didn't make it up. It's from the Intuit Institute for the Future, which I really encourage you to read. I have the website there. It's really, they have done studies on these emerging trends in small business nationally, but they particularly apply to California because of the innovative nature of our small businesses. As I mentioned, the very strong immigrant and women self-employed sectors as well. These trends indicate increased needs for entrepreneurship education and small amounts of capital. Whoops. Oh, there we go. Oh, good. And the reason I talk about that is that what we need to do is reduce barriers to entry and help businesses be successful. We all hear about that mortality rate of, 80%, 50 to 80% of small businesses fail during the first 3 to 5 years of startup. But we found, and I've personally experienced, that when you provide that business assistance, when you help somebody get a small loan, you actually, or you have them in a business incubator, you actually turn that on its head, and we see 80% of small businesses succeed during those first difficult few years. So if we're looking at, well, we'll talk about policy in a little bit. I mentioned earlier it's kind of pathetic that the microenterprise development organizations that are my members, they're not pathetic, but the fact is that their capacity is still very low given what the demand and the need is. We've estimated that there are 2 million low and moderate income entrepreneurs in our state that, this is from the Aspen Institute, gave us that figure. And we're reaching less than 1% of those folks now. We have 30 nonprofit microlenders in our state, and last year they made 1,500 loans for about $12 million with an average loan size of $8,700. Now, one thing you need to realize too, the banks are starting to tighten up on credit, especially the small amounts. They'll only taking, sort of cherry picking people with perfect credit. So our members are now seeing people who have less than perfect credit, may not have collateral, again, are startups, and who need these small amounts of capital without paying huge credit card rates. So again, there's a big market for microlending. So what do we need to do to close this gap? How can we tap this huge entrepreneurial potential for new business development, new jobs, and new taxes? Right now, California spends none of its tax dollars on microenterprise. They do in Oregon, Nebraska, Washington, Pennsylvania, but not in California. And we can speculate on why that is. You can ask me questions later. I'll give you my opinion. Let's see. Okay. You're ahead of me. Thank you. I guess every time I go like that, you push the button. Thank you. So you don't have to actually know how to chew gum and walk at the same time. You just raise your head. As I mentioned in Servia's example, businesses take time to grow and accrue wealth. Grants need to be seen as investments, and the return on investment are new businesses, new jobs, new tax revenues, new products and services, more vital main streets, and then stronger and more sufficient families. You've often heard about international microfinance, and lots of times people are saying, well, what do you, in fact, when I say what I do at Cameo, they said, oh, are you financing businesses in Bolivia? And I said, no, we're doing them in our own backyard. International microfinance can be self-sufficient because basically the borrower is bearing the high interest and is not receiving any technical assistance. So we're looking at 80 to 100% interest rates, whereas in California our microlenders are maybe 8 to 12%, depending on the type of organization it is. So what we need to expand this is more cheap capital through CDFIs, through they're called, it's a hybrid equity debt product called EQ2s, and the program-related investments of foundations, as well as grant funds. We need more loan guarantee funds in the state program to leverage more capital. And we need even more partnerships between small and large lenders, which would create more economies of scale, and it would allow us to expand into hard-to-reach regions, often rural areas where it doesn't make sense to start a microloan fund, but you might have a church or an organization that wants to get this small amount of capital out, and by partnering with, let's say, Valley Small Business Development in Fresno, they're able to do that. That's part of their business model. They have about 20 very small, microloan funds that they work with Hispanic chambers of commerce. They work with towns like Parlier and small regions where it doesn't make sense to have your own. Most funders now, and I mentioned the EQ2s, those types of hybrid products are provided through Wells Fargo Bank and through U.S. Bank, for example. They require these partnerships now, so it's kind of a new day. We need to see these partnerships funded and give them support to mature. So, Cameo's goals are to see these services scaled up. We want to reach new markets. We have the Viva las Microempresas program to help our members reach more of the Latino emerging market. We have the Self-Employment Tax Initiative program to reach entrepreneurs when they have to go in and file their taxes and to provide them with business assistance. We are trying to raise $50 million in new micro-lending capital. We have some new partners with Merrill Lynch, Wachovia, Rabobank. Any of you heard of Rabobank? They're in the Fresno and in this area as well. They're developing a micro-enterprise initiative. It's not official, but I figure if I say it, it'll become even more official. And AT&T. For the first time, it's the first public utility that's actually created a microenterprise technical assistance program that's available all statewide. It's a small amount, $250,000, but I think when they see the success rate, they'll be able to expand it. We need a really big vision to attract new sources of capital. And that's our role at Cameo, is to advocate for state policies to support microenterprise, to provide these research on impacts, and to promote microenterprise as an asset-building strategy. Economic self-sufficiency for families, as I mentioned, opportunities for new entrepreneurs and for new locally owned businesses. I want to give an example in your own backyard. There's a program called Opening Doors, one of our members, and they have had an IDA program that's individual. I think you all know what that is, right? Because you've been coming to these sessions. Individual development account programs. They had for 4 years. They're not running it right now, but would be happy to do another one. About 60% of the people who went through their program in that 4 years had business goals. Many were Eastern European refugees. Two examples of businesses that it's like if I had to find a perfect example, and I made it up. I couldn't believe that she gave me these two. One is Stan Zhushenko, who has a company called New Systems. It's telecommunications access. It's now got, let's see what it is. Oh yeah, he started out with $4,000 in savings and then had it matched for $4,000. Again, it's one of those outsourced kinds of companies. He's now doing business with larger firms. He grew, he got some technical assistance, he got a microloan from Opening Doors, then he was able to graduate to a bank loan, and he now has 6 employees. Another example of types of businesses that we're seeing, the growth sector is caregiving businesses, whether it's elder care or child care. And Yakov's Child Care Center is again, had an IDA program, got some technical assistance and business training through Open Doors. Their IDA savings then enabled them to get a loan from a bank, and now their revenues are in excess of $100,000. And these are people who started with nothing and got that little bit of assistance and encouragement, that the savings that they had, then they leveraged that with a loan, then they had the track record so that they could go to the bank. You see how it sort of works logically? That's why we need to make microenterprise, you know, the key economic development strategy for our state. And I just wanted to finish up now by saying, you know, microenterprise has been seen as kind of an outlier, and I think the IDA program was seen that way in the beginning. And partly it's because we're funded by such a patchwork of funding. We have funds from HUD, we have funds from USDA, we have funds from SBA, let's see, Department of Labor, but all of them are like little tiny amounts. What my dream would be to see the governor create an office, maybe within business, transportation, and housing, that really focuses on microenterprise development, and have our discussion and conversation about economic development start with micro. I want to say one last thing about Women's Initiative for Self-Employment. Out in front there is a new research paper that they just issued called Closing the Wealth Gap Through Self-Employment, Women of Color Achieving the American Dream. And what they have found, and this is through longitudinal studies, 3 to 5 year studies, is that Latina and African American women have 3 times the net worth that when they started the program at Women's Initiative and IDA programs. And they particularly have shown the strongest percentage of increase in home ownership. So please take a look at this, because this is like a perfect example of what we've been talking about, of people with very, very low incomes getting to that point where they now have a major asset they can leverage for their business and for their families. Oh, thank you. I'd be more than... Oh, yeah, I didn't do that part, did I? What happened? Hold on one second. Let me just... I got lost here. Oh, yeah, here we go. Assemblyman Solario mentioned AB 2998, and that is currently sponsored by Assemblyman Wilma Mita Carter, and Frances from her office is here today. I want to thank you for that support. That would really push the Workforce Investment Board to issue clear guidelines on microenterprise and self-employment. Right now, almost no WIA funds are used for self-employment, a few little isolated instances throughout the state. So as I mentioned, self-employment being the labor market trend, it does make sense, doesn't it, to use Workforce Investment Board and Department of Labor funding for self-employment. I talk about import substitution. It's a term that I actually learned from Jane Jacobs, Wealth of Nation. To support locally owned, locally grown is microenterprise too, and we're going to be seeing and hearing more about that as the green sustainability movement grows. Again, it takes investment and time to evolve microenterprise, but what I hope I've been able to show you today through my personal stories and through the PowerPoint and the statistics is that it does work. So thank you for your attention. Oh yeah. I just forgot one more. I didn't know if you wanted to talk more about policy implications, but I feel like it's all on there.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. We'll open it up for questions, and please, if you could be loud with your questions. We don't have a microphone that we could pass around. State your name, and
I can repeat it too.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little more about the tax situation, because I know, I briefly years ago took a foray into self-employment, and, I was overwhelmed by the Social Security tax, the employer tax, employee. It was just, I'm trying to pay health insurance, and the startup costs. Is there any relief for that envision for self-employed and micro businesses?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the health insurance. I think that's a big gap, and there is a very creative program in Denver, in Colorado, that's working with Kaiser to graduate microenterprise or business owners, into Kaiser over time as their businesses grow. Even Barack Obama was the only person at the National Council of Rasa's recent conference that mentioned small business and health care. I don't have the answer. I just think it needs to be addressed, and it's an opportunity, really, to get more people into the mix and also to help them formalize their businesses, because we have a very retrogressive tax system when it comes to micro and self-employment. And that's why so many people stay under the radar. I mean, frankly, Sergio Gomez built his business very much as an informal business. Yes.
I was going through the packet here and I listened to your presentation, and you give a lot of good information on kind of the growth of microenterprises over the past couple of years, but I couldn't really find any data on how microenterprises compare, what their portion is of the total employment pie or the total job pie, the total tax revenue generated. How do they compare in every other sector in California?
Well, that's a great question. The question was, how does microenterprise compare to the other business sectors? The Senate Office of Research, as I mentioned in their recent policy brief, is beginning to pull together at least some data sets, the census as well as some others, to look at where sole proprietors and where micro businesses are. We don't really know. And that's one of the reasons why we need to focus on it, because that's where, it's like yeast, that's where all the innovation and the fomenting and new job creation is taking place. We know through the formal businesses that about 20% of employment is created through small business and micro business, excuse me. When we look at small businesses, which can be up to 500 employees according to the SBA, we're looking at closer to 50% of the private sector employment is created through small businesses. But with self-employment, and because so many of them operate under the radar, I think it's 3 times that much. But that's just kind of a gut feeling. But I'm afraid I can't answer that because we really don't know. Yes?
Other than technology, which you mentioned, what do you think are the big factors that are driving that explosive growth?
In self-employment?
Yeah.
People are seeing that corporations aren't going to take care of them. I want to talk about it on sort of 3 levels. That you have to find a way to take care of yourself and your own family. So self-employment has always been the way that immigrant or low-income people have been able to patch together income for their families. So I think it's partly that consciousness that your employer or your corporation isn't going to take care of you forever. The growing immigrant population that traditionally has started small businesses to serve each other, and because of the new markets that creates. More women seek the work-life balance through self-employment. There's still the glass ceiling if you look at who the corporate officers are in Fortune 500 companies. We don't see women up there. So what's the message? Start your own business, and there's so many successful women business owners, I don't even have to go there anymore. So that's the second feature. I think it's interesting that young people want to start their own business, and that's where I think that the notion of, well, they're particularly, they see the capabilities of technology, and with what I said about wanting to run their own show, the innovation is changing so rapidly. I think that's another feature. And then, as I mentioned, the retirees over 50s who know that their Social Security isn't going to support them, so they better have a small business on the side, or they want to stay in the mix and take their skill set and become consultants or create something new with that. So that's part of it. It's probably not the whole story. The economy, how people perceive the economy and their choices is part of it. Yes, and then yes.
As you were pointing out that some of the lenders are becoming more strict about the criteria to qualify for the smaller loans, and if you've heard the saying often, you have to have some money to make money. So it seems like people who don't have the assets, the collateral to qualify for the loans, are you finding that because of the mortgage foreclosure problem, is that making banks treat more and be less willing to loan them? How do you get around that?
Yes, the mortgage foreclosure, which has put squeeze on the banks, has affected micro businesses in two ways. One, it's made small amounts of credit much tighter. So you have to be, perfect, be able to, perfect collateral, been in business for while perfect credit, plenty of collateral, been in business for more than 3 years. The other way that it's affecting us is through the tightening of home equity lines of credit, or the elimination of them. And I know myself, or when I was self-employed, I used my home equity line to finance my business and for cash flow, because it was cheaper than going to a bank. And with those drying up, or shrinking, or not being as available, that's something to really worry about. Yeah.
So they have to be now the criteria they will already had, so it would be hard for startups.
Right, and that's why the microenterprise development organizations are so important, and why we need to invest money in them, because they can reach that more high-risk population. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Has there been an effort at all to tap into venture capital firms and the private sector and attract their philanthropic sensibilities in a way, or to figure out a way to share the risk and look at it in terms of that?
That's absolutely what you just said is making the case for it. It's been done in a very small way. The banks, of course, through the Community Reinvestment Act, they've had to do this, and they've done it pretty successfully and have been expanding. To have AT&T recognize that small business is its marketplace and do that is very new. I'd love to see PG&E do that, but maybe they'll follow in their footsteps. The foundations have been very mixed about program-related investments, PRIs, which are, for those of you who don't know what that means, it's like a 1 or 2% loan that they make to a nonprofit lender, and then they re-lend it out at a higher rate so they can make some money on the spread to finance the underwriting. That's not done as much as it could be, but I'm getting calls now from foundations that are interested in that, generally community foundations. But I don't know whether some of the larger foundations might do that now that they've had that settlement with Joe Cotto's bill. Are you all aware of that? To increase diversity and transparency with foundations. I'm hoping there'll be some response from that. But yes, it makes great sense. CalPERS, CalSTRS, Tony, I know that you've been talking to the State Hispanic Chamber folks to get smaller amounts of, get equity in so that smaller amounts of loans can be made available. I don't know if there's a form yet, if it's taken form yet.
No, but the big European funds already do microenterprise in emerging markets, not the U.S.
Right.
I would think it would be useful for us to focus on bringing in the big Dutch funds to see what we have to offer here.
that's why we need a big vision. We have to put it out there. We've been too small. We've thought small. The word micro is like, we're small. But now, it's micro. It's just a different way of thinking about it, right? And that's what Cameo's role is, to do just what you're saying. So thanks for the encouragement. Yes?
Hi, how do you identify and help motivate those people who are in the informal market to become, legal?
I have found that transformation takes place often through the business planning process, to really identify the markets, looking at what kind of record keeping needs to take place, how to build over time, build up over time, so you don't have a huge tax liability, but you get the assistance to be able to track your revenues and your expenses, so that you have a P&L statement that's going to work for your company. The nice thing that happens when you're part of that process, of the business planning process, is that you're learning from other businesses too that are going through the same things. You're not so isolated as sometimes we feel when we're working on our own, trying to figure out, oh, I want to pay my taxes, I want to be a good citizen, but everything is sort of militating against me being transparent and not black market. So it takes time. I would say it's usually the organizations that are part of Cameo will work with an entrepreneur over time so that they can then formalize and start paying into Social Security and begin to be, qualify for bank financing too. I mean, it really makes sense. If self-employment is a labor market trend, we should be creating ways for people to formalize so they can pay for Social Security. Otherwise, we're going to have problems later on. Yes. Yes.
Do you tend to recruit new businesses or clients that come your way, or do they seek you out? What is the balance there? And are there businesses that will come to you and you'll look at their, what they have, what their balance sheet is, and then advise them and say, well, this may not be the right way to go?
Cameo's members find the businesses in all kinds of ways, through radio shows, through home orientations, through word of mouth, largely. And I would say 50% of people who join a program will decide, through that self-assessment process, maybe I better not start a business now, but stay in my job and save money, or get an IDA program and begin, just they have a sense of the scope of what they need to do. We don't get credit for those folks that make a good decision not to start, but yes, it's sort of all of the above in terms of people's options. Did that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
I was thinking particularly the 80% of the businesses that succeed that you've worked with, so there's an earlier process of self-selection, which of course is a good one.
Mm-hmm. Many programs have kind of a launch your small business or beginners class. At Renaissance, we had a 10-week self-assessment class, and people from there then either went on to the business planning or they decided not to pursue it. Yes?
Claudia, could you elaborate on the policy proposals that you mentioned or moving through the process, and just give us a bit of background on where they are, what the implications are, and whether or not any of them will be signed, in fact, by the governor this year?
Thanks. Yes.
If you could tell us that.
Right now we are working on AB 2998, which is really, it's kind of real and illusion, in that we want to have strong microenterprise guidelines for the Workforce Investment Board. It isn't saying they have to fund microenterprise or self-employment, but in this process of establishing the guidelines, we see a chance to get some discretionary funds to then help localities implement. Wouldn't you agree, Francis? So there's this dramaturgy part, and then there's also the guidelines, the real part. The other issues that I put down on policy implications are really just in the beginning stages. We are focusing on rural regions, and we're convening a rural summit in Sacramento on October 23rd and 24th, which I recommend you're attending. If you're interested, please give me your card. It will be right here at the Sheraton Grand. We'll be having Michael Schumann, who wrote the Small Mart Revolution that I quoted from in terms of how small, locally owned businesses are multiplying investments 3 times faster than when you give tax incentives to large businesses and big box businesses. So that he's the progenitor of that knowledge, and he will be our keynote. So we're focusing on rural regions, and we see some policies will emerge from that. We've been focusing on micro lending, and so the big vision for $50 million in new capital and $15 million in new funding for technical assistance has come out of that effort. We're building the case for it, and I think once you start generating interest, then people start joining. The other recommendations that we have on here have not been initiated yet. It just seemed to make sense to me that the Board of Equalization should do something for self-employment tax assistance programs. So I decided while I was preparing this that I would put that one in. Yes?
You're speaking about the big vision and the necessity of expanding that. I'm wondering what other organizations nationally and regionally that you yourself collaborate with in order to facilitate that big vision. You mentioned the Aspen Institute. I'm familiar with CVED in Washington. If there's any other organizations that would be interested in knowing.
The Association for Enterprise Opportunity, which is our national association of groups, has about 500-600 members. They are definitely engaged in bringing the microenterprise message further, and they do the active advocacy with Washington. And we've just recently had an increase in the CDFI funds, some of which are used for microlending. Not a lot, but some. The SBA Microloan Fund was increased, and technical assistance, and the women's business centers were also slightly increased in funding. Usually the SBA advocates for their defunding, but they were actually increased. We're hoping there'll be some federal appropriations in January. They've been pushed back to January, so we're hoping to see some investments in, particularly in Fresno area, in Santa Barbara, and hopefully statewide too. Who are some of the other people? I wouldn't say that microenterprise has been, it's been high on the agenda of the housing people or the many of the people who advocate for community reinvestment. It's part of it, but we're very much in the nascent stages. You're my guinea pigs today. That's why I've been fussing through my papers, because we're getting our message together now. And I really appreciate this opportunity to put asset development and microenterprise into a more or less coherent format. There was one other question, yes.
Just based upon my personal observation, I haven't studied this at all, but it seems like microenterprise people who work in microenterprise or own microenterprise or sole proprietorships tend to work very hard, tend to work very long hours. It tends to be a very competitive environment. And maybe even if you look at it like, $1 per hour kind of thing, they're working for minimum wage and maybe less. And I guess my question is this, first of all, are those observations valid? I mean, is that kind of how sort of it works? And if it is encouraging microenterprise development, I mean, kind of encouraging a permanent underclass in society where people work, very hard for ultimately very little money, and combining that with reducing barriers into entry, even if a microenterprise does become successful, with reduced barriers to entry, other microenterprises can basically come along and consume part of their market share, and so it's the ultimate kind of hanging on.
Well, there are two sort of concepts there. Those are the kinds of discussions it's good to have a bottle of wine and just kind of, let it keep going. When people are hungry, they will work hard because they have a dream. And so, yes, people work hard for very little money in that first startup phase of their business. If they're smart and if they if they get the help they need, whether it's one-on-one assistance or through a training or SBDC, a mentor, there are a variety of types of workshops people can attend. If they get that help, they tend to have a little better basis for making good business decisions. In fact, most businesses fail, according to the SBA, for a poor business decision, and then secondarily because of lack of capital. So I think it's getting into that point of what their business decision should be. Many low-income people use self-employment as a patch of income, and so through wage employment in the family and maybe working construction or on the on weekends, I'm trying to think, landscaping, swap meets, farmers markets, all of those kinds of activities then help patch income for the family to then get to that next stage. So yes, you do work for very little in the beginning, but you're working for yourself and you have this goal. And that's where the IDA can come in, because it can help you use that a little extra capital to be able to get your truck repaired or buy a new computer or get some of the other equipment that you might need to run your small business. Now, by reducing barriers to entry, what we do is we then get more people in. That's true. But the percentage of success usually stays the same. I found that about 25%, 30% of folks that came through our program were gazelles, actually created more than five jobs through their business. So it just stands to reason. If you get more people in, you're going to have then a larger number of people succeed. And they aren't necessarily, I think, seeing people as then cannibalizing or taking market share away. What I see in communities is when you have a coffee shop open like at one end of 3rd Street in Bayview Hunters Point, and then you have another one open on the other end of 3rd Street. Now at least people know they can get coffee on 3rd Street, whereas before there was nothing. So, and I see the same thing with Starbucks, which is, a chain. We're looking at locally grown, but still, when you create that mix of small businesses, then people start coming in, and that it actually increases the amount of activity.
Follow-up comment on that. Starbucks is the perfect example. Starbucks' business model is to look for successful microenterprises and successful coffee houses, and when they've established a niche, move in across the street and essentially steal their business. It's very hard to find independent mom-and-pop coffee houses anymore. Another example.
Well, that's not true.
Well,
it really isn't.
It is true compared to Starbucks or video chains. I mean, it's also very hard to find video rental stores that are mom-and-pop owned. Most of them are Blockbuster or Hollywood Video. So it just seems like, in the long run, the deck is stacked against the micro entrepreneur.
Well, you have to have a balance.
Because a large organization that has more capital, okay, and more business know-how and savvy, whatever, is always going to have an advantage over the microenterprise.
Well, if your local economic development office makes a decision to invest in locally owned businesses, then you'll have a balance. And you can have legislation that supports that. San Francisco's had, as you may have heard, it's been controversial at times because they will not let chains into certain areas without getting particular kinds of hearings. But it's worked to at least keep a lid on it and allow locally owned to prosper. But in Sacramento, I know you can go for miles and never see a locally owned business. Yes. One more left? Excuse me? Oh, okay. Yes.
Hi, I guess in parallel to that question over there, isn't there also the potential for microenterprise, maybe you can speak on this, is how much microenterprise businesses actually create new niches or markets? Because I feel like one of the things that is talked about with this kind of thing is that people have ideas that haven't been thought of before, but maybe haven't been funded. So is it true that microenterprises actually create new markets instead of just sort of replicating markets that exist or typical business environments?
Well, the question was, I'll just repeat it, do microenterprises create new markets and new innovations? And it's a bit of both. I mean, in some cases you see the mom and pop and you see another cafe and you see another coffee shop. another boutique, and then you'll see, particularly with technology, innovative ways of providing services and outsourcing new services. Oh, I'm just trying to think of something off the top of my head now. It might be a way of marketing a particular type of service that hasn't been thought of before. The concierge, for example, services where people actually have it's like having a housewife that you hire to help take care of things for you. I don't know if anybody's used, yeah, a personal assistant or a personal concierge. Those were entrepreneurs that just saw, hey, there's a gap here in need, and they worked to fill it. Probably worked for $2 an hour until they were able to get to that level where they had the scale that then brought in plenty of money. We've heard about some companies that did grocery delivery as well. That was one that I remember in the past. Electric cars, that took more capital, but now we're starting to see them as just normal, right? 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. They were incubated. The reason I'm thinking of the electric cars and electric bicycles were being incubated over in the Alameda Naval Air Station area. So that's so there's some sort of higher scale, bigger scale to just, you know, a service in an area. Okay, thanks. Good questions.
Thank you again, Claudia, and thank you for joining us. I again welcome you to join us to the next coming forums and the forums to come in the fall. Thanks again, and thank you, Claudia.